Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Back again to talk about our Advanced Holy Priest Guide for Mythic Sepulcher of the first ones. I wanted to take my experience going through Mythic and also pair it up with a lot of the questions that I've been receiving over the past couple weeks that Mythic has been out, and relate some of my experiences and look at answering those questions when it comes to which covenant to select, how the hell does Fey Guardians work, how to make the most of your set bonus, all that other good stuff, alright? So first and foremost, I did want to answer the Covenant question, because it's one that I got a lot, and we'll also roll that into how Fey Guardians works, okay? So a lot of the question has been, well, hey, like, why don't I just run Mind Games, Venthyr, have my Token of Appreciation, bonus healing is always very strong, and I'll be able to have crit all the time, tons of critical strike for my Divine Hymn, for my Salve, all that great stuff. Now, keep in mind that Holy Priest is fine with whatever covenant that you select, but Mind Games, Venthyr, things like that is really not as good as Night Fae for a couple different reasons. One, Night Fae gives you the cooldown reduction bonus for DPS, which is why you saw it so frequently in a prog raid environment. Two, you did actually see some Venthyr Holy Priests, but a lot of times they were like disc mains who never in their wildest dreams would have imagined playing Holy on prog. So they're like, oh, I got fucking Venthyr set up. That's pretty good. All right, we're going to run with that, you know. That I know did happen. And then three, yeah, getting a lot of critical strike for your Salve or for your Divine Hymn is really good. But with Holy Priest, the majority of your healing isn't in your cooldowns the way it is for like disc. You're not like super bursty. You do produce a lot of healing, obviously, with your CDs, but you also are doing a ton of output in between, in the intermediary, which is always really important to look at. Particularly in a prog environment, you do spend a lot of time actively healing, actively giving the spot heal support and everything like that. So having a couple like short duration, short uptime crit buffs is all right, but Night Fae with the mana return, with the cooldown reduction to buff your DPS, or, you know, to use it onto yourself to get those sweet 2-minute-ish timers for your Divine Hymn is really good on fights like Lords of Dread, Rygalon, very, very good for something like Skolex, Artificer Zymox. It can work really well with always having it up for the intermissions. There's a ton of different fights where you can consistently get your Hymn at a certain point if you wanted to, thanks to the Legendary. Which also is going to dovetail us into how the hell does Fey Guardians work? Because I've gotten that question more times than I can count while we've been progressing, and I kind of always give like a quick half answer. So I wanted to clarify how that works, as well as the Covenant Legendary, the Unity Legendary. So Fey Guardians gives you 3 fairies. All right. You get a Wrathful Fairy, which is applied to either the enemy target that you're casting it on, but in more likely case, you never really want to cast Fey Guardians onto an enemy. Instead, you'll cast it onto an ally. So the Wrathful Fairy will always go to the closest enemy or a close-by enemy. Important to note about that, because if you're in a fight like Rygalon, it can go to one of those nearby Quasars that's kind of running around the room. And then when the Quasar dies, your Fairy will just kind of drop. So you would have to reapply it to the boss. So as you see on Rygalon, every time I cast Fey Guardians, I'm always casting Shadow or Pain onto the boss to make sure that Fairy goes that way, okay? Next, whoever you cast Fey Guardians onto will receive both the Guardian and the Benevolent Fairies. Guardian gives damage reduction, and Benevolent gives cooldown reduction for one major ability. For Holy Priest, it's Divine Hymn. For Warlocks, it's something really good that they like a lot, and they will never stop asking me for it, right? Now, this will bring us into Bwonsambi's Pact. Whenever you cast Fey Guardians, the Death Mask is going to replicate one of your fairies. So, whenever you cast Fey Guardians onto an ally, it will automatically choose to replicate the Benevolent Fairy, the cooldown reduction fairy. Okay? But if you, for some reason, moved your cooldown reduction to somebody else using Flash Heal, that Death Mask is still on that first target that had both the Benevolent and Guardian on it, and so then it would switch to replicating the Guardian Fairy, okay? Keep in mind, you don't want to move all these masks around and all these fairies around. That's not how the ability ever is supposed to work, or usually should be worked. The only time that I ever actually moved my fairies around was Rygalon progression, because we had 2 of our Holy Priests casting it on Warlocks to buff their damage. The way that they wanted to use our raid cooldowns meant that I needed to use fairies on myself a couple of times, in order to reach that cooldown reduction point for Divine Hymn so I could cast it at the right moment. So I was really the only one who ever moved my fairies around. All the other guys would cast it on a Warlock, maybe cast the shield on the tank if they were getting clobbered, which a lot of times they were, and then they just made sure that the fairy was on Rygalon and didn't fall off, okay? What I did was a little bit differently. I would cast Fey Guardians sometimes on the Warlock, sometimes onto myself, but I would also keep track of my cooldown reduction, and then I would move my Death Mask by activating the Fey Guardians button again, and I would move my Death Mask onto Rygalon to get bonus mana back. That was really, really nice for the fight like that, because you're just constantly slamming out a lot of heal casts, and you constantly need a lot of mana to be able to sustain it. But that is pretty much the only fight I've ever moved the Death Mask whatsoever, and a lot of times you just do not do that at all. So make sure your Wrathful Fairy is on a target that is getting hit. It doesn't have to be hit by you, just getting hit by other players. Make sure it's getting hit by somebody in the raid. Doesn't matter if they have like damage reduction up or any of that other stuff. If you're in like Artificer intermission, make sure the fairy's on Artificer, because it'll get hit by Cleave during its intermission because you drag all the ads on top, you know? All that stuff. Make sure it's getting hit. Make sure it's not on a target that's going to die, and you will get mana back, okay? Guardian Fairy is going to go at the same spot as your Benevolent. All you have to do is cast Shield onto like your tank if you want to move it around. Usually pretty good, especially on later fights, because tanks do end up getting clobbered. But otherwise, you don't really have to stress it that much, okay? If you're casting it onto yourself, for example, great. You know, a lot of times I'll cast Fey Guardians, cast him, take advantage of the extra haste bonus that Dreamweaver gives me from the Bed of Flowers or whatever it is, and I'll still have my damage reduction on myself while I'm hemming for some protection and everything. Cool. But like I said, if your tank's getting clobbered, yeah, just cast the shield onto them. It's a very weak powered shield, but it'll move that damage reduction fairy for 20% DR for them for an extended period, and that's great. Overall, cast it on whoever you want to get cooldown reduction on. Don't worry about moving around your Death Mask unless you have some very niche circumstances. Don't worry about the Fey Fermata Conduit unless people are really paying you a lot of gold to switch around your cooldown reduction onto people back and forth, because that's just a lot of work. It's not really how it's realistically played in a prog environment. You don't need to stress over any of that stuff, okay? Now, let's start talking about some of the other playstyle adjustments that you're really going to make on your own with tier sets. Divine Conversation is the buff that you are receiving from 4-set, okay? The 2-set bonus is once you cast a Holy Word, the follow-up spell is going to give you more cooldown reduction for that respective Holy Word. So if you cast a Holy Word Serenity and then you follow it up with a heal, you'll knock off an extra 20 or 15 seconds. So it'll be like a 21-second net cooldown reduction for your next Serenity. So you really heavily accelerate your Holy Words. But that being said, this buff can be consumed by itself, more or less, if you cast like back-to-back Holy Words. So if you cast like a Serenity into a Sanctify, it can sometimes consume that Divine Conversation, so you lose 2 buffs, which means you lose over 30 seconds of cooldown reduction for one of your words, which is really, really bad. Sometimes it consumes it on Chastise, oftentimes it doesn't, but the premise stands, don't use 2 Holy Words back-to-back. You can, especially on like the pull, you can just like Chastise and then follow it up with like another Smite for some damage or whatever, sure, if you're not ready to instantly pop off with lots and lots of healing to get more Serenities. I would always recommend you to cast it for more Serenities, consume every Divine Conversation buff, get more Serenity casts out all the time. Otherwise, you're forcing like Prayer of Healing, which is very inefficient, or Renew, which is very inefficient, to get some cooldown reduction for Sanctify, and it's really not worth it at all. It's super easy to be efficient with Serenity heals, and just feeding that sort of feedback loop of getting more Serenities, consuming your Divine Conversation with heal casts, which are buffed by your 4-set by 60%, and Resonant Words by another, 15, 20%, something like that, a lot. You get these massive, massive follow-up heal casts, which do a lot of self-healing for you with Binding Heals, our new talent for this tier. Does a lot of Trail of Light healing, does a lot of Echo follow-up healing as well. It is just super, super powerful, and you really notice those differences. I had to soak some of the cores, for example, on Mythic Rygalon, and having those empowered follow-up heal casts make a massive difference on my own personal self-healing, on just spot healing, healing through massive absorbs, all that other good stuff. It's great. So that's how I would take advantage of it. There's a lot of ways, I think, that people sort of try to like overcomplicate how Holy Priest works, but it's a simple spec that you don't need to overly stress on. And that's what I really want to make sure I make known in this video, is that you don't need to start doing all sorts of crazy things whenever you're in a prog environment. Some of the other little min-maxes to keep in mind: you can immune some mechanics through Dreamweaver's Seed. It's really good if you, for example, sort of like bleed out or tick out from like Halos on Desegni, then you'll go into Seed form, and then you're not going to die to the other mechanics. If you do end up going into a Seed, for example, for, I believe, a couple of different like AoE effects or explosions, you can kind of just immune those outright, which is great. You know, you'll have times where you're maybe getting ticked out by like Lords of Dread AoE or Anduin ticking damage or something like that into like the Befouled Barrier, and you can sit there in your Seed, you can heal up, and then you can sort of bounce back. So when it comes to prog, the Seed is insanely powerful. The overheal protection is always going to be great. When it comes to your defensive usage in the raid, keep in mind, Symbol of Hope as a 3-minute cooldown means you need to be casting it very frequently, and you also need to be able to sort of trust those that extra minute of cooldown reduction to know, hey, this is where I'm going to be able to better distribute some of my defensives throughout the raid. A lot of times, particularly on something like Prototype Pantheon, I was looking to get those Desperate Prayer casts for the times where I'd need to be able to heal the Seeds the most, where I said, okay, I don't want to have to worry about myself. I don't want to have to worry about having to heal myself. I just want to let Binding Heals do its self-healing, or even on a fight like Prototype, I was running Guardian Angel for the extra cooldown reduction, and I said, okay, I'm not going to have as much self-healing here. I'm just going to be able to dump everything I can into the Seed for the healing, and I'll get my bases covered. Overall, whenever I run Fae, I only run Lasting Spirit for something like Prototype Pantheon. The rest of the times, it'll be Resonant Words, Holy Oration, and Lasting Spirit, or whatever the Prayer of Mending one is. You know what I mean. Whatever that Prayer of Mending one is. For the Holy Words, Prayer of Mending, and for the heal casts, you run all of those, you get your output bonus, and you're chilling. Otherwise, make sure you're really aggressive with how you want to use your soul shapes. When I was doing Rygalon progression, I would use the soul shapes to negate the draw-ins. I would use soul shapes on Pantheon if I got knocked up into the air to get me back on the ground, or if I needed to jump past the animal line fence. That was always particularly very good. There's a ton of uses with it, and I know with how easy it is to switch around your soul binds and your covenants, it's really easy to sort of like forget about your movement ability, but in this raid in particular, it is just insanely good. You can even use Soul Shape to jump past the wall of lines on Halandris if you get really close. That'll probably take a little bit of practice, but when you're progging that boss for hundreds of pulls, you'll have that opportunity as well. And yeah, keep in mind the buffs that you have on hand. Don't try to overcomplicate the spec. Make sure you're playing very efficiently. And you'll often find that you can kind of cut out some Circle of Healing casts if you're not worried about mana in any way, shape, or form. So keep that in mind as well. On some fights, I would kind of just keep Circle of Healing as like my mobile cast if I had to move around a lot. But otherwise, kept my Holy Words on CD, I kept using Prayer of Mending on CD, stuck with that Discipline and the other abilities and everything with their cooldowns, and I was fine. Alright, hopefully this helps. If you have any other questions though, feel free to let me know. Also be sure to check out Questionably Epic Live, because they have a ton of information for optimal trinkets and everything like that, especially at different eye levels and breakpoints and all that other good stuff. Check them out. They got tons of good information, especially now that we have Legion Time Walking. So certain trinkets like Flask of the Solemn Night are very good because of the uptime that they do give you, that you can get drops from and everything like that from Legion Time Walking. So check that out as well. But yeah, any other questions, feel free to hit me up in the comments down below. Be sure to join Discord, also linked down below as well. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you all found this useful, and I'll catch you all next time.